Every government on Earth is lying to you. Not about politics, not about money, but what's really out there. They agreed to one thing, never let you know the full truth. We're the ones they call when the truth breaks free. Enter the Foundation.
They told us the lake used to be beautiful. When the helicopter doors slid open over southern Siberia, all I saw was ice and silence and a ring of fire. Floodlights bleached the snow around the perimeter, long lines of fencing and fuel pits carving a hard circle into the taiga. Beyond that fence, the land turned the color of raw meat, a smear of red and brown and pulsing white that used to be villages. I had seen pictures of SCP-610 before I came to the Baikal quarantine zone. Satellite photographs, drone stills, clinical reports with words like dermal lesion and uncontrolled fibroplasia. None of it prepared me for how wrong the Earth looked when the infection had time to grow. They met me at the landing pad with a Geiger counter, 2 armed guards, and a flamethrower team standing on idle nearby just in case I tripped. Dr. Rena Novikova, the captain said, his breath fogging in the air. You will stay inside the blue line at all times. If any of my people tell you to move, you move. If you feel a rash, if your skin itches, if you so much as think you saw something move out of the corner of your eye, you report it immediately. Understood? He did not wait for my answer. Nobody ever does when SCP-610 is involved. They already know your answer. You say yes, and you hope it is enough. The command bunker felt like any other Foundation field installation. Concrete, steel desks, banks of monitors. The only differences were the flamethrowers stacked by the door and the map on the wall. A topographic print of the region with several blotches shaded in a dull, greasy red. Known infection zones, Captain Ilkin said, tapping one of the stains. We call them sites A through F, perimeter in blue. Artillery arcs here and here. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. That is the whole strategy. Scorched earth, I said. He gave a humorless smile. Scorched everything. They showed me the earlier footage before they sent our rover in. The first reports had come from local police, then the regional authorities. Farmers had stopped answering radios. Patrol cars vanished. A government agent sent to investigate never reported back. Then came grainy bodycam video of soldiers walking into a rural village and finding no one living. The houses were still standing, but they bulged. Plaster walls sagged outward under the weight of something fibrous and wet. Window frames had been pushed into almond shapes by the pressure of scar tissue that had grown wherever the infection touched wood. In the footage, the soldiers stepped carefully over carpets that used to be clothes and animals and people, now flattened and fused into a single continuous mat that stretched from doorstep to doorstep. One trooper had brushed his fingers along a doorway where the living meat had dried into a crust. The video blurred, then cut, then resumed a few seconds later with the man screaming. It started with a rash, the report said, an itch he could not scratch away. By the time the helicopter arrived, he was gone under a shell of hardened tissue, still breathing, still moving, already changing. The protocol after that was simple. Anything inside those red marks on the map was considered dead. Anything that tried to leave was shot until it stopped, then burned until nothing remained. but ash. Our job was to find out why it had started. Site A, Ilkin said, pointing at the largest stain. A cluster of ruined villages on the map. We keep losing drones around here. Something in the growth interferes with radio. My superiors want answers. Your superiors say you have clearance. He glanced at me. I hope both groups are right. The rover looked like a toy tank, waist high, painted white to match the snow. A mast on its back carried cameras, floodlights, and a small sampler for air and dust. It rolled forward through the open gate while we watched from the monitors. An extension of our eyes without the inconvenience of a human nervous system. For the first 100 meters, the world looked normal. Pine trees, broken fence posts, snowdrifts rippled by wind. Then the ground turned glossy. The meat began where the last controlled burn had stopped. It grew over charred earth and blackened stumps, thick and smooth like scar tissue. It had once been skin, according to the biopsies, but now it was soil. The rover's treads left shallow grooves in it that slowly flexed shut after it passed. Zoom, I said. The tech adjusted the feed. Patterns became visible on the surface, pale ridges spiraling outward from lumps buried in the mass. In a few places, the tissue had cracked open and something mesh-like pushed through, branching nodes like knuckles, swelling and splitting again. Those used to be houses, Ilkin muttered. We found them half buried in the growth. Roofs had collapsed under the weight of layered flesh. Chimneys jutted upward like broken bones. The rover's camera panned across what used to be a street and saw nothing with a distinct shape until it passed a doorframe that had survived the first wave. A human face had dried there, stretched thin, features distorted and flattened, lips pulled wide. The skin had taken on the same color and texture as the surrounding tissue, but the eyes were still there, fused shut. The tech swallowed. Movement on the left, he said. At first I thought it was the rover's shadow shifting. Then the bulge in the wall detached itself, unfolded, and stepped forward. The thing had been a person once. It still used the same number of joints, but not where they had started. Scar tissue wrapped around its torso in layered bands, pinning arms in place until they split apart into new limbs further down. Its head had elongated and sagged, jaw melting into its chest in a tangle of cartilage. Ropes of flesh trailed from its shoulders, fused to the ground behind it like half-formed roots. It turned slowly, as if scenting the rover through cameras we could not see. Then it began to walk. Range to target, Ilkin asked. Rover is 28 meters from the fence. The tech replied, Wire clear. We were. The thing was not. Keep the feed, I said. We need to see what it does. The creature moved toward the rover in a straight line, pausing only when its trailing flesh caught on a rock or a buried beam. When it could no longer walk, it pulled itself forward with too many arms, dragging its mass along. Shreds of tissue peeled off where it scraped and were left behind, quivering. At 10 meters, the scarred strands anchoring its back thickened and hardened. It stopped. Its arms spread, fingers splitting open into smaller appendages that pressed into the ground. The flesh behind it swelled and flowed outward in a slow tidal motion, crawling up the sides of half-burned trees. seeping over boulders. "It is rooting," I said softly. The air sampler's readout climbed. "Particulate increase," the text said. "Organic, fibrous, sub-micron. You will lose the rover if you keep it there," Ilkin warned. "Would already lost it the second we opened the gate," I said. "Now we learned something with it." The creature's original body shrank as the network behind it expanded. Features smoothed away. Limbs folded inward and were absorbed. In a few minutes, nothing remained of the individual shape, only a low mound feeding the growth around it. The rover's treads began to sink slightly as the tissue thickened. I thought of the reports from the first infection cases: rashes, itching, skin sensitivity. Within hours, their chests and arms had been wrapped in ropey scars. Within 5 hours, there was no human shape left. Now I was watching the last part of that process turned outward. The infected rooting themselves in place and becoming soil for more of the same. "Pull it back," I said finally. The rover reversed. Strands of flesh clung to its treads, stretching before they snapped. The particulate reading stayed high for a while, then dropped as it crossed the fire break and rolled back into clean snow. Ilkin tapped the map again. "That is the surface," he said. "What you wanted to see is underneath." The first tunnel had been discovered by accident. A drone rolling over what looked like a simple bulge had punched through a thin crust and toppled into a hollow space. Its cameras had swung wildly, then steadied just long enough to show walls that were not stone. The Foundation wanted samples from those caverns. They wanted to know if something down there was shaping this growth, guiding it. They wanted to know if it stopped at the surface, or if it had already spread far beyond their carefully drawn blue lines. Which meant somebody had to go in. There are protocols for that. Level A containment suits with external oxygen, remote vitals monitoring, a radio channel that can be cut and scrubbed in under a second, a flamethrower team standing by whenever you leave the bunker, because if you breach your suit inside the perimeter, they are your last mercy. I suited up knowing all of this and stepped through the gate anyway. You do not smell SCP-610 through a sealed suit, but you feel it. The ground under my boots had the give of cartilage, not soil. Each step released a faint resistance. The motion damped as if I were walking on a mattress. The wind had died near the heart of Site A, replaced by a constant low vibration that hummed through my soles and up my spine. "Distance to tunnel mouth?" I asked. 30 meters, the tech replied. "Bearing 042. You will see the collapsed house in front of you." I did. It had once been a farmhouse, now half swallowed by a dome of flesh. The roof had caved inward, creating a sloping ramp down into darkness where the infection had dug itself into the frozen earth. Light speared ahead of me as I descended. The walls of the tunnel were not carved so much as grown. Layers of tissue fused together in thick cords. Some pulsed, some did not. Faint branching patterns spread where different textures met, like veins pressed into clay. "Air quality?" I asked. "Particulate heavy," came the answer. "Filter status is green. Time in environment recommended at less than 30 minutes. I will be faster than that." I lied. The passage widened as I went deeper. Smaller tunnels branched away, each lined with the same fleshy mesh. In one side chamber, my light caught on something that broke the organic monotony. A chair. Loops of tissue had wrapped around its legs, anchoring it to the floor, but the metal seat was still visible. So was the shape sitting in it. At least it had started as a shape. Now it was an armature for growth, bones propping up layers of hardened scar that had flowed around and through it. A hand had fused to the armrest. Fingers had elongated, split, and continued on into the wall, joining the network. Human remains, I said quietly. Partially incorporated. Can you see cranial features? The voice in my ear asked. Negative. Head is fully encased. Copy, Ilkin said. Advance. We are at your 10-minute mark. The tunnel dropped again. I felt the change in pressure in my ears. The vibration in the floor grew stronger until it was almost a sound, a bass note that did not quite reach hearing. The air sampler values climbed again. Dr. Novikova, Ilkin said, you are approaching the safe time limit. Another 30 meters, I said. There is something ahead. The walls around me were smoother now, less like random scar tissue and more like the inside of an organ. My light fell on folds and ridges that repeated with disturbing regularity. The tunnel turned a final corner and opened into a chamber that did not feel like a cave at all. It felt like the inside of a chest. The ceiling arched overhead in rib-like segments, each one sheathed in pale tissue that flexed with slow rhythm. The floor rose in a central mound, its surface glossy and wet. From that mound, red cords radiated outward, disappearing into the walls like veins. At the apex of the mound, something moved. I froze. It was not a humanoid shape this time. It was smaller, dense, a knot of interwoven strands that pulsed in time with the vibration I had been feeling in my boots. Every few seconds, a tiny opening along its surface would dilate, then clamp shut. Each breath expelled a faint mist that glowed in my light for an instant before dispersing. Control, I whispered. I have a central mass in the chamber. It appears to be generating airborne particulate. There was a long pause at the other end of the line. I imagined the command bunker, a dozen eyes locked on my feed, hands hovering over kill switches, flamethrower triggers, and artillery phone. Can you approach safely? Ilkin asked at last. That depends, I said, on how you define safely. You have 80 seconds before we hit your time limit. The tech said, what can give you 90 at most? I stepped forward. The mound shivered as if it had felt my presence through the floor. Cords tightened, then relaxed. The knot at the center flexed, several of its tiny mouths opening at once. A wave of fine dust rose, hung, drifted. Alarms chimed in my ears. Particulate spike, the tech shouted. Doctor, your outer suit surface is saturated. No breaches detected, but we need you out of there now. I kept moving. Close enough now to see that some of the cords leading into the walls were not flesh, but bone. Human femurs, ribs, vertebrae, wrapped in tissue and connected to the core. They had used us as scaffolding, I thought. Every victim whose body stopped wandering, every one that rooted, fed something like this, something that pulsed and breathed and thought. We need a sample, I said. If this is the source, we cannot leave without proof. Negative, Ilkin snapped. You leave now. That is an order. The infection changed behavior after the tunnels formed, I said quickly. It began expanding faster, deeper. You saw the reports. This is the only new variable. If we do not know what it is, we do not know what it will do next. The core flexed again. For a moment, patterns showed on its surface, folds etched into the tissue like scars or writing. I stepped close enough that my light washed over it completely and reached out with the sampler probe. The world jerked. Not physically. There was no impact, no sound, no obvious change. But something inside my head twisted as if a muscle had cramped. For an instant, I saw the chamber from a different angle, looking down through walls and soil at a network of tunnels like roots beneath a forest. I saw similar chambers branching off in directions the map on the wall did not show, spreading far beyond the blue lines. Then the vision snapped away. Dr. Novikova, Ilkin barked. Respond. I realized I had dropped the probe. It lay on the mound, half sunk into the pulsing tissue. Strands were already wrapping around it, drawing it inward. No sample, I said. My voice came out hoarse. The mass is reactive. It may have some kind of telepathic component. Understood. You are at 90 seconds. Get out, or I will seal the tunnel with you in it. I believed him. I turned and ran. The vibration in the floor rose to a steady thrum as I retraced my steps. Behind me, the cords leading to the central mass tightened like muscle. Walls flexed. The chamber started to close in on itself, folding, pulling away from the tunnel. Surface in 90 seconds, the tech called. Soot integrity is still green. Doctor, you need to keep breathing. Your oxygen rate just jumped. The incline felt steeper on the way out. The air sampler values dropped as I climbed, but my heart kept hammering. Somewhere above me, the sky was still clear and cold and full of burning lines the gunners could call down if they needed to erase everything I had just seen. When I stumbled out into the open again, Ilkin's helmeted face was the first thing I saw through the frost on my visor. Behind him, flamethrower operators waited with nozzles angled toward the tunnel mouth. Any breaches? He asked. None detected, the tech answered. External saturation only. Decontamination required. They walked me back between two armed escorts, weapons held not at the tree line but at me. At the decon station, jets of burning chemical washed over my suit, crisping anything that clung to it. The air stank of scorched polymer. Only when they had me stripped down to bare skin, scanned, and sealed behind glass did anyone relax. What did you see? Ilkin asked at last. I stared at the monitor in front of me. A single frame from my helmet camera was frozen there, the image distorted slightly by signal interference. The central mass sat at the center of the frame, cords radiating out, tiny vents along its surface, frozen mid-pulse. For a moment it looked almost like a heart. A seed, I said. The captain frowned. A seed of what? Of more than this, I said quietly. You saw the drone readings. The infection spreads mostly by touch, but there is an airborne component. It is slow, inefficient, only dangerous with direct contact to exposed organs. That is what the reports say. That is what we have convinced ourselves to believe, because it makes this manageable. I tapped the screen. This thing was trying to show me how far it has already gone. Silence filled the observation room. Someone shifted a clipboard. A pen clicked. On the other side of the glass, my skin itched faintly, the phantom memory of heat and vibration. Our perimeter holds, Ilkin said eventually. We have artillery. We have fire. If anything tries to leave, it dies. That is enough. For now, I said. We burned the tunnel entrance that night. Fuel trucks rolled up to the edge of Site A and spilled a glittering river onto the snow and flesh. Artillery traced arcs across the dark sky. When the shelling stopped, the infection at the surface had retreated into a layer of smoldering ash. Deep below, the network still pulsed. I sometimes dream of standing on the shore of Lake Baikal before all of this began. In the dream, the water is clear and still. People laugh on the banks, their voices thin with cold and joy. Then the ground under my feet starts to soften. By the time I look down, the earth has already begun to breathe.
The file is closed, but there are thousands more. Subscribe for the next case. Comment your theories. The more you know, the more danger you're in. The Foundation is watching.